Okay, median architecture, architecture 243, exercise 4. Let's do this. Um, the exercise 4 is asking you basically to use all of the skills that you've worked on and developed to date in the course and apply them for two concept models, in particular two concept models for a roof structure for the intervention that you have for the current project. In this case, I'll use this same example that I used for the last exercise where I created the massing and essentially walk through some steps to create a roof structure that has a little bit of mass to it, so it's not just a thin surface. It has some three-dimensionality to it. So then I can begin to use other tools like Slicer and perhaps 3D printing and a few others to help create this physically. Also, keep in mind that the idea here is, especially in keeping with exercise 2B, where you added basswood structure and just added other components and planes and so forth. That also should be part of this exercise. So it's not purely just what you're pushing through the programs here digitally. It's also, once you have something physically, to manually begin to alter it or add to it, enhance it with structure and other materials to complete the overall concept model. Again, the idea of a concept model is really to explore ideas. I'm not too concerned with actuality here, although it should be, relatively buildable, and that will make it that'll be apparent through Slicer and some of the other tools. But it's mainly to push ideas. What can I achieve? How do I push my ideas as far as I can, and have them manifest not only three-dimensionally, but also, of course, spatially. Ultimately, again, this is about spatial composition. So I'm going to walk through the steps how I created this, so something that you would create similarly, and then walk through a few of the other exporting and a few of the other things that you might consider. One thing that I went ahead and did was to create a roof layer, just a separate layer from the others, so I can keep it on its own. So again, just as a review, you would hit this new layer button. You can go ahead and click it and give it a name. So I already have a roof, and then you can start working with if you wanted to change the color of it so it shows up in a particular way, you can go ahead and make a different color selection for the layer. But I'm going to go ahead and delete that since I've created one already. I'm going to work with this layer. All right, so more or less I'm going to work to recreate what I did here. Basically, if I'm understanding this as a mass that I want to work with, or that I have already worked with, I want to start to understand some other ideas about it structurally. So one thing, of course, is the roof structure and how expressive can it be? How can it begin to allow for transition from interior to exterior? I have an exterior space carved out here, which is meant to kind of take on the qualities of the sculpture garden, and perhaps some others that talk about entry that I can begin to work with. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, I'm not going to really alter this at all. But basically, I want that structure, if I've already created this, and you guys should have a model of this already, I want this structure to basically fit right on top of it, almost like, I don't want to say like a hat, because this doesn't look like any kind of reasonable hat, but I want it to fit directly on this model. So you want to make sure that it's going to reference these surfaces and so forth. So in order to do that, the first thing that I'm going to do is just go ahead and create the base of the roof structure that I started working with here, and I'll show you some other ideas that I was working with to kind of elaborate or extend a little bit. So I'm going to just go ahead and start creating some surfaces on this existing mass. I'm going to turn off the base, site base, because it's just kind of in the way right now. And I want to make sure I'm really selecting the intersections that are appropriate here. Again, I want to make sure that this is going to be a watertight assembly, so I'm able to effectively use slicer and also potentially 3D printing, which also requires that. Now I know in here, kind of in this this area, I had the sculpture garden, so I'm going to go ahead and create some kind of structure to help define that space. You can see the example there. So I'll just go ahead and start creating that, and I think here I don't know, perhaps we'll have to be careful because there's that. So this is already a little bit different than that one, which is fine. And then I think I'll create another one, I don't know, to the midpoint there. That looks decent. I'll go ahead and create one with this area. I have to be careful here. This kind of looks like a triangle, but if you remember, there's this little notch there. So I'm going to make sure not to forget that. And perhaps I'll just go, oops, Control Z, go all the way here. And then I can create a final rectangle, or sorry, triangle, there. Okay. One thing that I wanted to do, I know I talked about this as a roof structure, but I just wanted to go ahead and explore some other possibilities as well. And looking at the just where this sits overall, you know, there's some space here towards the rear to the north of the site that I wanted to take advantage of, and of course this being the busier street, I wanted to be able to create some kind of transition if this is meant to be some kind of entry sequence here, in addition to what's going on there. So what I did to achieve that is I just created another surface, and I'm just going to go ahead and use that. In this case I'll turn on my near snap, because I guess like around there, and then I'll turn near off. Again, it's really important. It's so easy to not hit these corners or these intersections, and they'll cause problems later. So you want to be really careful of that. And I don't know if that really, maybe that does bother me. I think what I'll do is delete this. Control C, I brought it back. What should I do? Maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to create a line here. So I want this to extend out that way. And I'm going to go into curve, extend curve here. And if I just left click and don't select a boundary, it's asking for a boundary here, I can then just select a curve and I want me to select the boundary. I have to right click. Then I can just select the curve, and it'll let me select that at any length, so I'll just let that work out here. Now, I'm going to want to go ahead, it probably would be okay, but I want to go ahead, actually it wouldn't. If I were to select, escape out of that, select this and turn on my control points, select this control point, and then bring it out, what's going to happen is you're going to start getting some curvature here. So I don't want that. I want these to be nice and clean triangular surfaces, so I'm just going to delete that surface and create another one. Get into this point, and it looks reasonably on the site. Okay, so that'll be some kind of overhang or something, and then I'll create another surface here, to that surface. Again, I'm just, ooh, really just sculpting here. I'm really just kind of study modeling and as a concept model, seeing what may come out of it. So I'm not too concerned with this being exact or anything. It's a study model, so I'm being pretty free with it. Maybe I'll select down to here and finish it out there. Okay, so I don't know. That's a little bit more complex than what I had going on in this one. Well, these two are different too. Oh, okay, anyway, that is fine. And if you wanted to, of course, make some modifications to this, that you could go ahead and do that. So at this point, I'm going to turn off, let's see, and the base. Now I'm going to want to try to get some thickness to work with here. And these are all separate surfaces right now, so I'm going to select them all, type in join. Join. Okay, and then one thing that I could do just to kind of quickly get some thickness is to go ahead and execute the offset surface command. So we'll go down to offset surface. Now it's saying right here all these arrows that it's going to offset down. I want to go up, so I'll flip all. The distance is already set to 24 inches, 2 feet, but I could select whatever I wanted to here just by typing it in, but I'm actually fine with 24 inches, 2 feet. And then I will right click and it'll create that surface. Now it's going to be a little bit off in some cases, so you have to be careful. You probably have to reconstruct some of this. So I'll go ahead and do that. And for this, I'm actually going to just turn that bottom off. And I'm going to explode this. So I want to get to these individual surfaces and make sure that they are all lined up. See, some of these are just kind of off, so I'll delete that one. Create another. Oops, be careful. I'm going to align it with this surface here. This one really got crazy. So I will go to near, hit that edge, and I'm going to hit this point there. This I will delete. And this is really up to you. So I mean, I'm just really just going at this for the sake of the demonstration here. But you would want to, think about design, and I, was thinking about this edge and so forth. But you want to really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve in terms of design. All right, this one I definitely want to delete that. It looks all messed up. And just kind of keep going around. I'll go ahead and recreate this one as well. So even this little area is kind of not looking great. So then I'll go over there. I'll delete this curve. Delete this other surface. I'm trying to make sure that these are going to be lining up. This looks like it's all messed up too. Again, there's more than one way to do this. The offset surface can get a little messy, as you can see. I went too far. if I really wanted to get in and zoom more, I could do that. Make sure I get that. And then this corner. And right away I'll go ahead and delete. It wasn't working. So I have nice, clean, triangulated surfaces. I have to be careful here. Again, I probably want to zoom in. Get that exactly. Okay, some of these are still off. I'll just go in midpoint to midpoint. And I know that's the point I want, but I will reference these others, get all this to line up. And I was having some issues here. Let's see. These are just kind of off. Delete that, create another one. Make sure it's right on the surface. There we go. Delete this one. Do the same thing. Just creating these nice faceted surfaces. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and join this. Again, you can type in join or hit the puzzle piece there. And I'm going to bring back that other lower piece. Okay, looks like we're doing decently. Now what I want to do is I want to enclose. So if I want to create this solid, create some mass there, I have to close all these edges. So I'm going to have to go around. And again, this is where things, you want to make sure you're being very exact. Any little bit off will make for a little bit of trouble down the line in Slicer. It's not the end of the world, but especially like this little twisted panel. This will be twisted if I just created a 4-point surface here. But if I triangulate it, then it'll allow me to use the folded planes in Slicer if that's what I wanted to use. Just for that, I'm going to go ahead and copy this to the side, show something else. Okay. So I'm going to have to go all the way around and close this. But I'm going to go ahead and use this model instead of going through all that. Basically, you know, all of these edges I would have to go and connect. All these, I wouldn't necessarily have to triangulate them all like I did here, but I would just have to enclose all the edges, use 4-point surfaces, or triangulate in 3-point surfaces, all the way around, and then select everything, and then type in join. So right now it's partially enclosed. It's definitely not watertight, right? But that's the process. Now, I mentioned folded planes. The reason why I copied this to the side, and just as an example, I'll just show you right away. Rhino has a fairly handy tool. that is called Unroll Developable Surface. So basically what it's going to do, if I execute this command, it's going to take, essentially, if this were a cardboard box, it would lay out all the panels to create that cardboard box. In this case, it's a more complex faceted surface, and it'll do the same thing, basically give you the flat pattern to create this in a model, to create it physically or what have you. So I will execute Unroll Developable Surface. Explode, no, I do not want to explode it, because I do want there to be some seams, although it depends. You might want to try both ways depending on how complex it is. Sometimes exploding it, not exploding it is good, but sometimes the way it unrolls it will kind of fold on itself, fold over itself, overlap itself. You can add labels so you can match up the panels if you'd like. I'm just going to skip that for now, hit enter. So over here, what it basically did, and this is one case where it overlapped itself. So this is just a little bit funky, something's going on there. But in any case, what you're able to do then is take this and then execute a command like curve from objects. Silhouette could work, and this gets a little bit laborious, you could say. The other thing that you could do is extract, so silhouette's going to basically give me the outline for everything, so then I could, I would have the outline, but I don't have like all the folds where I'd want everything to fold. I can go back here and draw those lines based off of this. So that's a little bit of extra effort. Control C that. Curve from objects, I can also extract iso curves. So I can do that for each one. Actually, I didn't want to do that. Curve from objects. And one should just be mesh. I guess mesh outline might work. That's the overall outline, but you could do it for each panel. Control Z. Oops. Let's see, again, curve from objects. So silhouettes was one. Duplicate edge, that's just going to give me all the edge. There should be the wireframe, so that's going to give me all of the lines. The problem with this one is that it also gives me like the surface lines. It's a little light here. I'm going to change this to it so it's a little bit darker so you can see it. So it gave me all of these lines, and so I would have to go in and delete the surface lines. Some of these lines are just from the surfaces, so I just have to go in and delete those, and then join the others then I would be able to export this or scale it and export it as a DWG and bring it into AutoCAD and prep it for laser cutting and so forth. And then you could assign the edges to be perimeter cuts and so forth, and then these you could just etch it if you wanted to, because then that's just would be a fold. In the case of this, where there's this overlap here, and if you verified that there was nothing wrong with the surface that you created with it here, like there might be a little bit of an issue in the model where it's kind of overlapping itself, and I don't really see any problems. In any case, what I would do is I would go ahead, select the curves that are associated with it, and so let my shift key down, and I'll just pull that out, so I'll just move it there. And then I would have to draw another line just to close that up. Here, it happened here as well. And so it's not perfect, it's just kind of the geometry that you're working with. This is kind of a little suspect that it's an issue with this model. Something happened along there. Something's a little off. But in any case, if it does overlap and you see that, then what you're able to do is then again just pull those out and just move it, and then I could add my line here to close it up, delete these interior lines, so I know then I have these two pieces, and I would do that for all of them, and then I could select, once I've done that, I could select all of these. What I would actually do is go ahead and type join, so these were continuous curves. You can always explode it in AutoCAD if you need to create some different etching versus cutting. Then I can go into export selected. Let's scale it first. So cancel, I scale it 1/96 for an 1/8 inch model, go through that process, export the selected as a DWG, AutoCAD DWG. I've had trouble sometimes with DWG. I think it should work. DXF is the other option. And then you can bring it up into AutoCAD, open that file up, copy paste it, bring it into your template for laser cutting and make your adjustments there. So you could create a skin here. One of the requirements is that I'm asking you to look for and work with material structure like ribs and spines, but also a skin that would go over the overall structure. Integrate with the structure somehow. It doesn't necessarily have to be entirely continuous. So that would give you the skin, and then this other piece here is where you might bring this then into Slicer. So I'm going to go ahead and use this example because I've already gone through that process to clean it up and everything. Zoom around it. Delete. Okay, so a couple things that you want to keep in mind for this. So first, I'm going to get into a top view. I would copy this over a couple times. Okay, one, this may go straight into Slicer. So in this case, I'm going to need to scale it three-dimensionally. I'm going to pick a point that I know is going to hit z equals 0 down below, because I don't want to have this up in the air somewhere. So I'm going to just hit that point right there, and then I'm just going to go ahead and type in 1/96, my scale factor, and then that's scaled down appropriately. Now I could take this and export selected, STL file, and then I've already done that here, so I just called it roof 1, and then you'd be able to open that up in Slicer. The other thing that I'm asking you to do, and this is for extra credit, is to look at 3D printing. In the case of 3D printing, it also uses it will also use STL file, but you need to convert it to millimeters. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this as a selected. I already know it's at the right 1/8 inch scale. Again, you can go larger if you'd like, but 1/8 inch scale. I'm going to export selected, and I'm going to export it as a Rhino file. And I'll just say, I'll give it a date, 2, and I will say 3D print. I don't like to leave spaces in my file names. Also, excessive dots can also confuse some programs. So I'll let that always be the file extension .3dm in this case. Enter. So that file is there. So I can go ahead and open that up. 3D print. And what I'm going to need to do is, I'm not asking necessarily to 3D print the whole piece, but a section of this could be 3D printed, and that could be then included with another part of the overall assembly that is pushed through a Slicer, what have you. Okay, so here we have this piece. I know it's at the right 1/8 inch, and let's just say, I'm going to have to explode this. So we're going to explode so I can deal with certain pieces of this. And maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe it's this chunk back here. Maybe I want to 3D print that. I want to go to my top view, and I am just going to move it. Move. And I'm not too concerned with the distance there. Okay, so I moved that. I'm going to go ahead and move this along with it. Turn this back on. That can be enclosed. And I'm going to have to go through and enclose all this as you would to create a solid. So also, again, it has to be watertight for 3D printing. Okay. And this doubly curved area isn't going to matter for 3D printing. I should be able to do that. And then this I'll also need to, because this will just kind of slide right into that, and I just have to, once I print it all out, just work with some glue to fix these together. And again, this is an example, so you can experiment with other options, but I'm just showing you the main pieces here. Close this, and that was off. Something's off. Maybe that's all right. Okay. So I will select all of this. And these steps, I'm just kind of moving through it. You might find other steps that make more sense for you. Something's going on with the mesh here. The rendering mesh. That is a little funky. I don't know, maybe it's just my computer that's doing that. I don't know why it's freaking out that way. But there's the wire mesh, and then there's the render mesh, which shows up as the surfaces, and sometimes those can get kind of out of whack, but I'm not sure what's going on there. Okay. Take this and also join it. This one looks fine. Okay, so I could then take this piece and then export selected. Wrong folder. Concept modeling, working. 3D print, I'm just going to say slicer. Let's say slicer 3D, or let's say W3D print. Just so I know that this is the slicer component that goes with the 3D print, that's that one. Maybe that's not the best, but that should work. Okay, so now what I want to be able to do with this piece, a few things. Now I already exported this piece, and I can just run that through Slicer like you normally would. So, so that's been exported, I have that saved. I can delete this. You may want to double check just to make sure it came through all right, but I'm going to go ahead and trust that. Now one thing that is going on with this piece is that it's kind of floating in 3D space. And one thing that you will need when you 3D print is that you need a flat surface. And so I can see here that the top is a flat surface, and so I'm going to have to rotate this around. I think that render mesh was just kind of messing up because I'm working with really tiny pieces there, so it was having a hard time keeping up with those tight little twists. Zoom it here. So basically what I want to do is rotate this. Let's see if I can do it pretty quickly. Okay, so that is rotated in that direction. That's the left one. If I go to front, where is it? Is it still selected? There it is. Now, perhaps I should be able to rotate it this way. I just held my shift key down to get it flat. Okay, so it looks like then I have it flat down. And just so I know where this is in space, in case I have to get back to it somehow, I'm going to select this corner, and I'm going to move everything to 0, 0, 0. So back to the origin of everything. And there it is. Now I can go to my top view. Ooh, it's not selected anymore. There it is. And then here, if I wanted to rotate it one way or the other, then you could deal with that. Now, the thing you have to be careful of is that there's only a particular dimension that the 3D printer can print, and you have to double check that with Jay, and there's a couple machines that have different printing capacities in terms of dimension. Just that way. So I think I'm happy with that. But you'd want to make sure that you don't exceed the overall size of what you're able to print. So to check that, you could type in distance, so 6 3/4 inches. That looks like it, I think it's 8 inches in the shop, but you want to double check that first. I should have checked that before I went through all of this. So make sure that it's a smallish piece, but I think you should be okay with 8 inches or less. So it makes sense to double check to see what the capacity is there. Looks like this is not. So that is still a little twisted there. Let's see. Go into this other view. And I'm not sure if the interface for the 3D printer that they have will flatten it out. You can still manipulate it, but I always like to do it first in Rhino, so then to the left. Because basically what I want, I'm just going to draw a line here, and I'll take this overall piece. See, it's kind of rotated in both directions here. So this can get a little finicky. Again, it's for extra credit. So this is the front. So like I have to rotate it a few times about this point. So I could select this. I can hit 3D rotate, rotate axis. Perhaps I want it to be here. I want this to line up with that. And then I'm going to 3D rotate again. This corner, I want this to be the axis. Let's just see if this will work. Closer. It might take a few times to get that spot on because we're moving here in 3D space. So definitely that's something you have to be careful of. So that one is lined up. This one is not, so I'm just going to try to rotate it about that axis again. I'll make sure to get this point up there. So that looks nice and flat. There we go. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to erase those lines, reference lines for the rotate. Now I know it's flat down. So it was kind of key to put this at 0, 0. Then I could kind of line it up with these others. I had those other guidelines to help straighten it up, and a combination of the 3D rotate and so forth to help flatten that out. Now, the thing that needs to happen here for 3D printing is it has to be converted to millimeters. So I will go into, and the way I always get into the drawing properties or the Rhino property, there's a right click on render settings, but that brings up overall document properties. So it's quick, and then I can just access what I need to. And so model units instead of inches, I'm going to convert that to millimeters, converts this to decimals, I say OK, and then I will say yes to all of these. Now I know that, for example, this distance is 172 millimeters, 172.109, 172.109 should be 6.77 inches, 6 and a little over 3/4 of an inch. So then I could go back to the main model. Let me see if I remember where this piece was coming from. I think I do. It's that long edge. This here. So this should be about 6 3/4 of an inch. 54. Oh, this isn't scaled. Target that. Distance. So looks like it's right. So just to check. So then from that point, you could take this piece, or you could save this file, and take this piece and export selected, again, as an STL file. And then you could call it, you can give it a date or what have you if you want to. I'm just going to call it roof for 3D print. So that's the roof piece for the 3D print. I'll say OK. OK. Then you should be able to bring those pieces in. Now I'll try to bring that piece in here. This is the interface software for the 3D printer I have in my office. And it will probably, it's a different, I think this bed is only like 6.5 inches, so it'll probably exceed that. It may not let me bring it in. Let's see. There we go. Yep, see, it's a little bit outside of that bed, but I think the ones in the shop have a bigger capacity. If that's the issue, then you have to go back and make a smaller piece, or take this and divide it up into 2 pieces and fit it together accordingly. So that's just that interface. And again, I believe they walk through that with you in the shop there, but something you want to be aware of. The other thing, then we have the other piece, and I'm going to let go of this fragment and all of that and focus more on the overall piece and bringing that into Slicer. Again, just a few options that you might consider. So I'll open up Slicer. import. And let's see, roof one for slicer. I believe that's the right one. Make sure this is set to Z. So that's the overall roof that I have there for slicer. And again, you want to make sure the scale is at the original size. I'm glad that that works here as opposed to 123D Meg. And then you could select your media and walk through basically the same steps that you have for others, although this time, really thinking about structure in this case. And so, I have these panels just kind of flying around here. The direction of these looks fine, but this doesn't quite look appropriate. So I am going to, it's already set to by count, increase the number of those panels. They'll get really close together. Then I'm going to select the front. Basically what I want to do is rotate these so they're more like a series of beams and in-turn columns. So I'll hit that front. It's a perspective view. I wish it was just orthographic, but it's not. And I'll go into slice direction. I should be able then just to grab this, grab that. Oh, see, it's going in the other direction. There we go. And then I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. So that worked out pretty good right from the front view there. Now I can go in and just knowing where I am, start making other modifications. So if I wanted to increase in that direction, maybe what I actually want to do is increase in the other direction. Really get those going along the short span. Work with it that way. The other thing I didn't kind of walk through in terms of creating this surface, I did the offset and so forth like I went through with this example here. But I also, in some cases, took some of these panels and raised them up, so it wasn't a complete, so this wasn't necessarily consistent. In some areas, the roof got a little bit thicker in terms of its depth, so the structure would get deeper in those cases, and so I did that kind of in some of these areas. Let's see. So I didn't, I kind of just worked with that when I was starting to sculpt around, and so in some cases I would just raise a panel up and then recreate it there. So if I go to surface, offset surface, flip them all. And so then I got that. Instead of just going and cleaning it up the way I did before, perhaps I would take, we'll go ahead and turn that off. Explode this. Take like this one or what have you, go to a front view, and maybe I would just move it up a little bit. I don't know, a foot. I could type in 12 inches if I wanted to enter. So that's a foot exactly. Hold my shift key down to get it straight up. So then I could go and instead of just recreating all of these, and I could delete that one as well. I could get this area to be taller or higher, thicker, and so I can start working with it that way. Maybe it's just right at the edge that does that. Maybe it goes back down, so it kind of slopes or something. But that thickness starts to show up, and then that'll turn out once you see the difference between the lower surface and then this upper surface there. So I could have kept it high and just kept this area thicker and started working with that just the same. So that's the way I created this. So if you look at the front view of that, you can see, some areas are getting kind of thick in here. Other areas are basically 24 inches. So again, I was just working with that. So it wouldn't be necessarily, this you can see that variation show up a little bit. It's a little bit thinner here, a little bit thicker there, but that's the way I did it. I was just working with those panels. So again, with this you can, grab some of these and start, working with them in a few different ways, making sure that, you're going to capture some of these, and also that it's going to perform the way that you want it to. Like, I don't know if I really need that little piece there, and this one's getting kind of thick. over here, I might just go ahead and move that in, and then maybe adjust this one, move it in, and you know, I don't know, maybe delete a few of these others for just to kind of open that space up, and so you can really start to work with it. You know, some of these start to be kind of weird, so you want to be able to kind of capture those so they can fit into their place a little bit better. Even this, I can move it so it captures a couple of those. In this case, you can see here, these are probably not even going to work out to be anything. They'll just fall out. So interlocking panels, you can see that there, and interlocking slices rather. And so they all stack up pretty good, and you would go through your same steps in terms of getting the plans and then walking through the steps. I would, in this case, recommend to save a copy to your computer, and that's what I had done. That's what I will do. I'll give it a date. Oops. 402, and I'll just call it interlock. Interlock all, meaning it's the one that's everything is interlocking, and then I'll save that. So then you can come back and walk through the steps. I know someone had an issue with that previously. So go ahead here, select your DXF, export to my computer, and then you can make your adjustments and so forth there. Okay. The other idea then is to explore some other options. The folded panels may work. You know, it gets to be some issues, and you have to kind of work with it. It doesn't really like those doubly curved surfaces, so those tend to be issues. You also want to work then with adding and removing seams to really make sure that it's going to work for you. And because, you know, this got kind of twisted in here, again, they're not clean and triangulated, then it starts to be a little bit more complex. You can see there's a lot of issues, model issues here that are showing up, just as panels with errors. A lot of times you can still manually get these to work. The other thing that I would recommend is to use like perhaps the gear. You can actually fix some things. That's to how you attach one seam to the next, and then work with it that way. But this, I almost think that in a way cleaner would be the Unroll Developable surface. You know, this is just going to be way cleaner. You can glue those edges one to the next without kind of going through this, because of what I do think is that once you have the interlocking slices, and again, it's good to save it once you get it set the way you want, because it's going to revert oftentimes to a previous version. In any case, then you can take that skin and potentially just start wrapping certain areas of this open. Some areas where there might be structure that's exposed, and some other areas there might be to have that skin on it. So you'd walk through the process accordingly that way. And then for the other piece that has the 3D print and the interlocking, of course, then you would just bring in that single piece. I'll say no. I think the other roof for 3D print. I think that other file got saved somewhere else. I'll just... In any case, you would find that file, work with your file management, and bring that in. I think it got saved over here, perhaps. I'm not sure where. So I probably have to go through and save that again. But bring that in as an STL, and then work through your different construction techniques for that. I'm striking out all over the place here. So that would be wherever it was, where it ended up here. Yeah, I thought it was an STL with, oh, I didn't export it yet, so that was part of the reason. So I still have to go into Rhino and export it as an STL. That's why it was just the Rhino file. Now the other thing that I wanted you to work with was adding textures to some of these. So in a similar fashion, now you're going to have a lot of different pieces, whether it's these folded panels or the slicer pieces. Of course, the slicer pieces have their own. But what I wanted you to do is to go through this process of finding a texture from a raster image, create the vector image using the image trace and Illustrator, and then you would be able then to export that into as a DWG for AutoCAD, and then you could start to work with overlaying this. You'd have to do some trimming, but you can work with it, overlaying it there. Another thing that you could do once you do have these panels laid over, and so before you would kind of separate these out, and I know that there was the issue here, but let's say, for example, you wanted to bring in, you can bring in textures straight into this, or the vectors straight into this. So, and perhaps they're already in AutoCAD, the DWG. So I can bring that right in here. I can, let's say, allow it to say insert. That's fine. I'll say okay. Okay, I probably would want to have this on a different layer, by the way. Okay, so now it's asking me where to put that, so it's super tiny. So I will scale that up. Oops. That's that same texture that I brought. What you're able to do, so say I wanted some of these textures to be on these surfaces. So you may want to separate the surfaces out first. Let me just move this to the side here. Because once you execute this command that I'll be talking about, then you don't want to necessarily be moving this around, because it'll kind of be set more or less in how it's projected. So you'd want to make some adjustments here. I guess, I could just explode this and move these pieces out, as opposed to what I was doing over there. It's kind of the same way, and if you wanted them to be sort of close, you can kind of do that. Yep. So you don't want to overly adjust these, but I'm trying to get them close because I want the pattern to kind of work with everything. So what I'm able to do is I'm able to take this, and I'm going to go to my front view. I'm just going to move this texture up. And so I want it over. I go back to my top view, and I want it like here, and then I could adjust it, rotate it, or whatever I wanted to do till I got it exactly how I wanted it to be. Let's say something like this. Maybe this one. And of course you could keep scaling this to get to where you wanted it to be. Let's say something like that. Now what you're able to do is execute a command it's called project, and it's under curve from objects, and it's right at the top here, project. Select curves and points to project. Project all of those. All of them. So maybe I go on my front view and just select all of these. They won't all land, but I just want to make sure to select that whole area. Right click, select the surfaces or polysurfaces and meshes to project onto. I'll project onto all of these, and I hit enter. So now it took all of those curves and surfaces, or curves rather, projected them onto those surfaces directly. And you could do this to any sort of object. So if I wanted to, and I'm suggesting using it flat here because the flat, you're not going to have to overly manipulate it. You can just bring this basically straight into AutoCAD and then use some etching to etch that in. But just as an example, I'm just going to move this, oops, over, rotate it. And let's say I wanted to project it onto this. So again, I can execute the same command, curve from objects, project, go in that front view, curves that I want to project are those. And I want to be in the view that I want this to project. If I would project it right here, it would just go straight off into space and it's not going to hit anything. So I have to be in that top view for it to project down over these objects. So I'll select this, I'll select both of these, and it's going to take it and project it three-dimensionally. So right now these look two-dimensionally placed there, but they're actually anamorphic. They're actually working down orthogonally, or I guess this as a plan, it's working its way down to create this plan. So if it distorted to go along those surfaces, in other words, to create that. And it did it on both sides too. The surfaces, single surface is a little bit easier because it's just the single plane, but here it's going to hit through all of the planes, so you have double. So I don't know if this could be for like rendering or setting up a perspective render or something that you're going to use in Rhino. I would also, before I deselect that, group all those together, otherwise it's going to be a series of individual pieces. So I would execute this group command once I've gone through that process. But you know, to rotate these down and do all that work, that'll be a little bit unruly. So that takes a little bit more to work with. You may want to do that, but it's a little bit more involved. Here it's already flat, and so it's basically ready to take into AutoCAD for cutting and so forth. So anyway, that's a few of those ideas that you would then, even in Rhino, same thing. You know, I'd go into this selected here. If I wanted to bring this into AutoCAD, again, I would have to go through the process then of, it might just be quicker than do the other curve from objects, is to trace these out again, these outlines, so then you know those are your perimeter cuts. They're nice and clean, and then you bring these other curves with you. Don't export these surfaces; they won't do anything for you in AutoCAD. Only the line work. So then you would bring that into export it as DWG, then open it up as its own file, and same process then as this. So you could copy and paste, make sure everything's by layer in terms of the properties, make your adjustments for cutting and etching and so forth. So same process. That way too you could also do a little bit better job of nesting some of these. So the cut layout, get plans, you know, there's a lot of space here in terms of material that you may want to take advantage of. So if these were grouped together, and you could just type in group in AutoCAD, move these a little bit tighter, closer together, so you can maximize the use of your materials. That would probably make some good sense there. So those are just some possible steps that you might work through for this. Again, the idea of this exercise is that you're, you know, working with Photoshop and Illustrator, you're working with Rhino and Slicer and AutoCAD to create interesting imagery, interesting texture, and interesting overall tectonics and spatial suggestions for space, let's say, for this exercise as a couple concept models. In particular, more as a concept structural model that you might work with. Another interesting one that I was just kind of working with was the radial slices, which get a little crazy there. and this is way different than the one I was just working with previous to this. Just to start to work with it, and I don't know, see if there's something that comes out of it. There's some unexpected things that can happen, and you know, just like any of the other pieces, you can sort of rotate these around, and kind of unexpected kind of things start to sort of happen. Yeah, maybe that one becomes more planar that way, and I don't know, maybe this one really flies out. And just to experiment, you know, to see what may be possible using this tool to present other options to you that you hadn't thought of otherwise. Letting the modeling process, this hybridized modeling process, inform you of other possibilities. Again, each of these, once you would kind of print this out and cut it out and so forth, same as the exercise 2B, you know, adding basswood components, adding other materials that you thought were important, enhancing the structure even more as an overall abstract expression. I'm going to leave it there for now, and perhaps follow up if there are any other questions as we continue on with this project, but or this exercise. So until then, and until the next one, thanks guys.